Vice Mayor of Harrisonburg, and I'm very thrilled. Thank you to Casey Kettler and Livable Harrisonburg for inviting Chuck Marohn of Strong Towns here. Yay! I like to think we have a strong town here already, and your showing up proves that. And there's more that we can learn from Chuck Marohn, and Casey will give some more introductions. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief, but being a lawyer is an occupational hazard, so here we go. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Escaping the Housing Trap. My name is Casey Kettler. I'm the coordinator for Livable Harrisonburg. It's our goal to advocate for policies in Harrisonburg that promote abundant, affordable housing and sustainable transportation. Part of that is by educating community leaders and the public. This is the first of a series of speaking events we're planning for the city's zoning reform efforts. For more information, just add yourself to the sign-up sheet in the back. Or go to livableharrisonburg.org. First and foremost, I'd like to thank a few folks. First of all of you. Our city would not be what it is without the ceaseless efforts of residents, community leaders, and hardworking city staff, all working to educate themselves and make good decisions for Harrisonburg. Second, thank you to the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition for co-hosting. Oftentimes good housing policy and transportation policy go hand in hand, as you can read about in Chuck's other books. Tomorrow is also the beginning of Bike Month, and the Coalition is hosting a fun series of group rides and events. Thank you to Voluntary Gas Tax, our sponsor for the Zoning Reform Speaker Series. Voluntary gas tax members pay voluntary taxes on the gas they spend and use it to support efforts to fight climate change. Last but certainly not least, thank you to Chuck Marohn and Strong Towns. Chuck is the founder and president of Strong Towns. He is the civil engineer and land use planner with decades of experience. He's the author of Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity, of Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town, and Escaping the Housing Trap. He has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America. Plan Edison named him one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all time. More than all of this, though, Chuck helps to point out what is wrong and how we can make it better. Something is fundamentally not right with how we approach housing, but we can't always put our finger on it. First-time homeowners find it difficult or impossible to compete with buyers paying in cash. Housing that is available is usually more expensive than most people can actually afford. Oftentimes at community meetings, the refrain to more housing is not in my backyard. We're in a housing trap. And now to tell us what it is and how to escape, please give a warm welcome to Chuck Marohn.
I hope I'm not messing up here. I will try not to move very much. Thank you. It's very, very nice to be here. I want to point out some friends in the crowd. I've got my colleague and coworker here, Michelle Erfurt, who sets up all this stuff. So I'm here because of her. She set up, and she brought her two sons today, which are two of my best pals. We go to Disney World one day a year together every year, and have a lot of fun. So that's Tommy and Eddie. Thank you everybody too for taking your, I'm assuming is your lunch hour, your lunch break. I want to fill it up and make really good use of your time. So let's start. When we ask people about housing, and we say, do you think we are in a housing crisis? We get a resounding yes, yes. Everybody thinks we're in a housing crisis. And then we ask the question, to solve that housing crisis, what needs to happen to prices? About half of people say they need to go up, and about the other half of people say they need to go down. Like literally there have been polls of this. And it's like this Newsweek poll here, 43% said up, 41% said down. I don't know where you stand in this. But the reality is that housing prices can't go both up and down at the same time. And so if to alleviate your housing crisis, prices need to go up, understand that there's other people who, to alleviate their housing prices, prices need to go down. This is because we're having two conversations about housing. One conversation about housing is housing as shelter. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's at the very top. Everybody needs a place to live, everybody needs a place to lay down, everybody needs shelter. But the other conversation we're having about housing is about housing as an investment product, as an investment that an individual has, but also as a macro market investment, an investment that literally lies at the heart of our financial system, serves as the reserves of every bank in the United States. Housing prices in one of these conversations must fall. In order for housing to work as shelter, prices need to be way, way lower than they are today. But in the other conversation, housing prices as an investment, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. And this is the trap. We have actually created for ourselves a situation where housing is no longer affordable to a broad percentage of our population. And for those that can get in a house or are in a house, their ability to move, their ability to change jobs, their ability to do normal human things that you do through the course of your life is impaired because our housing market is impaired. Yet, housing as an investment is central and core to our economy. And when housing prices go down, things fall apart very, very quickly. And so we are, in a sense, trapped. I'm going to use this metaphor a couple times of a ship at sea. I realize that I'm from Minnesota, where a ship at sea means something very different than people who are closer to major bodies of water and have different experiences than me. But the idea is that a ship at sea is not in control of your own destiny, not in control of your own trajectory, essentially getting tossed by the waves. I want to talk about how we today are really a ship at sea when it comes to housing prices, and how we can anchor ourselves and moor ourselves to something solid so that our local markets can start to reflect our supply and demand dynamics. If we look at housing historically, a lot of people are very surprised by the way housing used to function prior to what we at Strong Downs call the suburban experiment, the post-war kind of different way of building cities that we embarked on at the end of the Great Depression and World War II. If you were going to buy a house prior to the Great Depression, that house was going to be financed locally at a local bank. For a local bank to write you a mortgage, they were going to ask for 50% down. Wow, that seems like a lot of money. Yeah, not really. 50% down, recognize what a local bank was. A local bank was taking your money and your money and your money and lending it out to you, right? The community itself, if they were going to put money in that bank, wanted to make sure that whoever they lent money to had a lot of skin in the game, had very, very little incentive to default. And so there was a high standard to borrow money from a local bank. The loan you were going to get was not what we think of today as a mortgage. They would have called it a mortgage, but it would have been structured very, very differently. It would have been something that would have had a 3-year or a 5-year payback. It would have been interest only, so you would not have gained any equity during the period of time. You would have just paid interest. And at the end of that 3 to 5 year window, there would be a refinancing. There would, in a sense, be a balloon payment that was due. And the reason that banks did that is because local banks can't take long-term interest rate risk. If local banks lend out money and then interest rates go way up or go way down, the local bank can get hurt really, really bad with, by the way, your money. And so in order to protect your money, the local bank required a big down payment and then periodic rolling over of that loan so that we, as investors in this local bank, as depositors, didn't wind up losing all of our money because of interest rate changes. The Great Depression changed this, right? Housing prices fell during the Great Depression. And I spend time focusing on this financing mechanism because I want you to recognize what happened to people during the Great Depression. When you can borrow 50% of your home value and housing prices go down, when your 3 to 5 year loan refinances, the bank will actually lend you less money. If your housing price drops, you actually are eligible, in a sense, from the bank for less money. When your 3 to 5 year loan payment comes up, then, what that means is that there's a gap between what you owe and what the bank will now lend you because your house went down in price. That gap you need to come up with in cash. During the Great Depression, in the most difficult market that our nation has ever faced. And what happened was a lot of people could not do that. They could continue to make the interest payments, right? They could continue to stay in their home if the bank had just like rolled it over and said, okay, we're good, just keep going. But the bank couldn't do that. They couldn't do that with your money. Like, it wasn't acceptable. And so what happened was people who could afford to stay in their homes were foreclosed on. They were actually kicked out because they couldn't come up with that cash payment when the balloon came due. What does a bank do when they foreclose on a home? They don't hang on to it, they sell it. What happens when you sell a home into a depressed market? What happens to housing prices? They go down further. Okay? The more housing prices went down, the more the next person had a big cash gap that they had to come up with. Again, they got kicked out of their home. The bank foreclosed. The bank would sell that home, driving prices down further. This, in economics term, is called a deflationary spiral. The more people that go into default, the more homes go on the market, the lower the prices go, the more people go into default, and on and on and on and on. The New Deal project, and this was like the first 100 days of the New Deal, the idea was we need to arrest this deflationary spiral. We need to stop this trap of housing prices going down and down and down, and more people getting kicked out of their homes, really for no good reason. They were willing to make the payments, they could continue to make the payments, but they just couldn't come up with this big cash gap. So what the federal government did is the federal government went to local banks, and the first thing they said is, hey, don't foreclose on that person. Don't kick them out of their house. We will buy that loan from you. And so we'll make the bank whole, we'll take care of that problem, and then we will turn around as a federal government and we'll go to the homeowners and we'll say, hey, can we refinance this loan for you? We'll make it a 15-year loan, we'll make it a 20-year loan, we'll lower the interest rate. Someone really wants to order lunch, it's okay. We'll lower the interest rate, we'll make it easier for you to stay in that house. We'll have you pay principal and interest, so after 12 years, 15 years, you'll own that house. The federal government also went to local banks and said, hey, when you write mortgages, go ahead and write them with lower down payments. We, the federal government, will provide you insurance for that gap. So instead of requiring a 50% down payment, just require 40%. Just require 30%. And yeah, that makes you nervous, you're uptight, but we'll write an insurance policy on that loan for you. The federal government will insure it, so you, the local bank, don't have to worry about taking risk. And if you want, the federal government ultimately set up a secondary market. So if you want local bank to write more loans, we will buy that loan from you. As long as you meet some specific requirements that we have, we will, the federal government, purchase that loan for you. So if you ever have a cash shortfall or need to get something off your books, or need to move, we, the federal government, will take care of this. This stopped the housing decline. It stopped that deflationary spiral. And it kept people in their homes. It stabilized the market. And in many ways, this was I'm going to use the word moral thing to do, right? It was kind of an emergency measure done in an emergency period of time to stabilize the market. Again, I'll go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everybody needs shelter. Everybody needs a place to stay. This allowed people to stay in their homes and stabilize things. The big trade-off here, and I'm gonna point this out and I'm gonna come back to it in a little bit later. The big trade-off here is that for local banks, this didn't make a lot of sense. Local banks are borrowing short from depositors. When you go deposit money at the local bank, you are actually lending the bank money. And the bank then takes that and does stuff with it, right? They lend out that money. The difference in terms is the biggest risk that the bank takes. When you come in and you do a deposit, you can go back tomorrow and take that money back. So you are, in a sense, lending to the bank short. The bank is borrowing short term from you. But when the bank writes a 3-year loan, a 5-year loan, they are lending out long to someone else. If interest rates shift, if interest rates change, let's say interest rates go way up, all of a sudden, in order for the bank to have depositors, the bank has to pay a much higher competitive rate of interest. But they've lent to you over a long period of time at a low rate of interest. So now all of a sudden, the bank is losing money. This is the risk that local banks take. The federal government came in and said, we want you to write longer term loans now. We want you to write even more risk. And local banks don't like to do this. They're freaked out about it. And so as part of this deal in the Great Depression, the federal government said essentially to banks, we've got your back. We need you to stabilize the housing market. We need you to make this market work for people. You are an important part of this. We got your back. Go ahead and make these business decisions that maybe don't make a lot of sense to you in your own little bubble. We're going to make you part of a big macroeconomic market, and we got your back. We'll take care of you if you ever run into problems. At the end of World War II, economists were freaked out. And they were freaked out for some very understandable reasons. We had gone through the Great Depression, one of the greatest periods of economic dislocation that any economy has ever experienced. The thing about the Great Depression really was that economists didn't understand what caused it, and they didn't understand how to get out of it. You can go back and read stuff from the day, or you can read books looking back at it, and we still don't agree on what caused the Great Depression. All of us are taught in middle school what got us out of the Great Depression, right? Eddie, you know what got us out of the Great Depression? Probably. What got us out of the Great Depression? Yeah, global war, right? You know we live in a world dominated by economists when like the good times are the war, right? So if you're a bean counter in Washington, D.C., everything's bad, everything's bad, everything's bad. Oh, yes, global war, tens of millions of people dead, rationing of everyday goods. Good times are here again. Why are good times here again? Because all of a sudden GDP goes up. We took millions of working age people, we shipped them off overseas to kill and to die. We took millions of other working age people and we put them to work in factories, building bombs and ships and planes and all the things we needed for war. As the war was winding down, or as the war was kind of looking like we were going to prevail and we were going to win and like there's going to be a post-war, the economists around FDR freaked out. This is a memo from Paul Samuelson, the premier economist of the 20th century in the United States. He wrote to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and he said, hey, if this war ends, we're going to have the biggest period of economic dislocation that any economy has ever experienced. When we bring all these troops home, when we shut down all these industries, we're just going to go right back to the middle of the Great Depression. There's nothing different about our economy now than there was 10 years ago. Is that what happened at the end of World War II? No, right? We did something radically, radically different. We embarked on this experiment to create an entirely new version of America. An entire new living pattern, an entire new living arrangement, something that had never been done in human history, we did across an entire continent at scale. One aspect of this experiment was housing. And the thing we found at the end of World War II is that all of the programs we put in place to keep housing from going down in price, to stop that deflationary spiral, worked really, really well when it was reconfigured to make housing go up in price. We lowered down payments in the Great Depression. Now, if we lower down payments even more, we can get houses to go up. We provided a first-time home buyer or home buyer subsidies. If we did that after World War II through the GI Bill, we could get a lot of people in a lot of housing. We can get building really, really quickly. If we extend out terms, first it was 12 years, then it was 15 years, then it was 20 years, then it was 30 years, we could lower that payment and allow people to pay more for housing. So what we discovered is that we could stay out of the Great Depression. We could actually make the economy grow really, really, really quickly by making it easier for people to borrow more money to get into more homes. This was wildly, wildly successful, right? At the end of World War II, this is the first basically life cycle of the suburban experiment, 1945 to 1970. Saw a massive increase in gross domestic product. Our economy grew incredibly. Our federal debt grew as well, but not very much. And this was really, really important because at the end of World War II, we had a really high debt to GDP ratio. This is kind of the mark of an economy in distress. How much public debt do you have versus the size of your economy? It was at all-time highs. I say that knowing that we are at above that level now today, but at the period of time, they were all-time highs. And this massive growth in GDP from this housing boom, and really the first generation of suburbia, created an economy that allowed that debt to GDP ratio to come way, way down. This is a success story that economists tell us over and over and over again, right? At the end of World War II, we invested in ourselves, we created growth, we put money into infrastructure and highways and housing, we built a middle class, we created all kinds of prosperity, and all the numbers worked out really, really well. Debt to GDP ratio went way, way down, and the federal government was in a much more solid position. What is often not talked about is what made up for this growth, or where this growth came from. Because when we look at private mortgage debt, what we see is that our economy didn't stop taking on debt. The debt just shifted from the public sector to the private sector. We took on massive, massive amounts of private debt in the 25 years after World War II. Mortgage debt grew by over 1,000 times. Again, wildly, wildly successful. And if you're trying to fight the Great Depression, this makes a lot of sense. The problem is, the more we grew, the more we needed to have the growth in order to make things work. And so what you end up with is you end up with a series of cycles where housing becomes more and more core to the economy. And when it becomes more and more core to the economy, we actually see prices go into a series of bubbles. This is the Case-Shiller Index. This is an index of housing prices over time. I've started it here at the end of World War II, and I brought it up through the Great Financial Crisis in 2008. And what you see is a succession of bubbles. We had a bubble at the end of the 1960s, an inflationary bubble, higher interest rates, dropped that back down. We had another bubble then in the late 1970s, mid to late 1970s. Again, very, very high interest rates brought that back down. Low housing prices or falling housing prices was unacceptable to our economy. Our economy doesn't work when that happens. And so you saw a deregulation bubble. We call it the S&L crisis, but it's basically a crisis of deregulation to try to, again, juice housing prices, get things moving in the right direction. That ended poorly. And then, of course, everybody in this room is familiar to one degree or another with what we now call the subprime bubble, right? This idea that if we make borrowing conditions very, very loose, if we decentralize the system, that appraisers and local banks and people working on a local level will be able to aggregate their actions out into these large mortgage-backed securities and other kind of hypothecated financial instruments to create a very, very efficient market. Each of these bubbles gets bigger, right? Each successive one is bigger. And as you look at this, as you understand, housing as a financial product becomes more and more core to our economy. Today, and this happened in the mid-1980s, but really took off in the 90s, the federal government has made laws that state that bank reserves, which used to be just cash, treasuries, federal bonds, basically like the most secure investments you can have, banks are now allowed to also use mortgage-backed securities as their reserves. As long as they are rated AA or AAA, a bank can swap out their cash, swap out their treasuries, which generally yield lower, for higher yielding mortgage-backed securities. And so when I say that housing is at the core of our economy, it is literally, housing is the reserve asset of every bank in the United States. At the end of the subprime crisis, this is a chart of home building. Here's the end of the subprime crisis. We just stopped building houses. And we stopped building houses because there was no market to buy houses. Not because there weren't people who wanted housing, but because there was no mechanism to finance housing. We had screwed up the housing market so badly that we didn't know how to write mortgages to normal people anymore. It became really, really hard, really, really difficult, and builders responded by not building very much. Of course, for those of you that are in the millennial generation, you understand that that period of time where we stopped building also corresponded to your kind of entering into adulthood, entering into the period of time where you normally would buy a house or look to buy a house. And so we had a whole decade of people or a whole generation of people who for a decade would normally have tried to get into housing property that were in a sense shut out, or was made very, very difficult. It wasn't made very difficult for everybody though. The strategy that we ultimately embarked on after the great financial crisis was again to kind of double down on financialization. This is Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve. He was giving a speech and he said, hey, house prices are falling, rents are falling. You know what would be really great is if we turn some of these into rental properties. And that's what we did at scale. The people closest to money were able to secure not 200,000, 300,000 for a mortgage, but 200 million, 300 million to buy up thousands of homes across the country. Something that would not have been possible in an era before smartphones and tablets and email, but is very easy to do now. You can manage thousands of properties around the world from New York City in a hedge fund, and that's in fact what has happened. There's a lot of debate in the housing market on how much investor-driven housing purchases have changed market dynamics. I think that debate is kind of silly. Anyone who is a baseball fan or a pro sports fan and watches free agency and the huge contracts that are signed by people understands the concept of the marginal buyer. The marginal buyer is the market maker. They're the person willing to pay the highest price. And when they pay the highest price, it affects everybody down the scale. And so when people close to money are able to make cash purchases and basically outbid everyone for prices, it has, even if they're a small percentage of the market, it has a dramatic impact on home prices. So here's our Case-Shiller index. And let me point out, every economist, I don't know one who would not call the 2000 to 2008 period of time as a bubble, right? Here's where we're at today. We have, in a sense, recovered to a bubble condition. And I want to emphasize that point for a second, because when we talk about a financial bubble, we're talking about a distortion, something that is not in touch with reality. When economists use the term bubble, they're saying this should not exist naturally, but it is existing. And, you know, we can explain it through, in a sense, financial reasons. The idea of recovering to an unsustainable financial position is a really bizarre concept. But that is what we've done. That is what we've tried to do. And in fact, the numbers show that that is where we are at today. This leads us to a point where we have to entertain the conversation about what the product is. A lot of us, when we think of buying a house, when we think of going and looking for a home to purchase, regardless of the size, people, when they think about buying a rental property or commercial real estate, whatever it is, we think of the product as being the house and the consumer being the person, the family, or whoever that is purchasing the house. That really is not the product that is driving the market today. We really need to step back and say, not what is the product, but who is the product, right? The product that drives the market today is the financial product that is created from that transaction. You are buying a house? Great. That is ancillary to the creation of a mortgage. The mortgage is the thing that is going to be sold to bundlers, packaged up with a bunch of other mortgages, sliced up into a mortgage-backed security, sold off to different funds, hypothecated, bet on, used to secure banks, used to secure pension funds. It is the thing that our economy needs to work. And because it is the thing that our economy needs to work, our economy is much more sensitive to the macroeconomic conditions than it is to local supply and demand, local capacity to buy. The price of the houses in your market is not a derivation of what people in your market can afford to pay. That's how a normal market would work, right? It is a derivation of what the macroeconomy values housing at. what the mortgage is valued at, what the interest rates are, how much liquidity can be injected into the system. I started this by talking about a ship adrift at sea. We, as homeowners, as home purchasers, as renters, as people living in a community, are on a ship of housing prices, and we have no local mooring to it. It is all nationalized. It is all part of a macroeconomy. If we watch how decision makers in Washington, D.C., the state capitals, respond to what now everybody's starting to call a housing crisis, the response is more of the same. It's more of what we've been to. How do we lower down payments? How do the Biden administration now wants to do tax credits for home buyers to help you, get a little bit more money when you buy a house? How do we lower interest rates? How do we get more money into first-time home buyers? I want us to recognize today that making it easier for more people to borrow more money, to pay more for housing, is not the answer. The next product that we're starting to see trickle into the marketplace is the 50-year mortgage. Yeah, I looked on your face. You're like, oh, that makes me sick to my stomach. Yeah, it does. It makes you sick to your stomach because you're acclimated to something else. Understand that people in the Great Depression, if you would have said 20-year mortgage, 30-year mortgage, they would have gone, I can't imagine that. For younger generations of people who can't get into a home and are literally not able to get in a home, and watching other people be able to, and watching housing prices go up, and their wealth, their ability to earn, their capacity in life is being impaired, a 50-year mortgage, basically 50 years of, in a sense, debt servitude, is a better deal than what they're getting now. I started out by saying that the Great Depression, the things we did were moral. I think the things we're doing right now are immoral. They're actually going in the opposite direction. We need to create a local market. We need to create an anchor for our ship at sea that anchors us to a local supply and demand dynamic, one that reflects our capacity to pay and our ability to finance housing locally. If we're going to make that shift, I want you to struggle with this question. Is our goal to make affordable housing? Or is our goal to make housing affordable? If you look at the way we approach this housing crisis, we talk about how do we build more affordable units? How do we go out and create more affordable housing? What is the program we can do to do 10 units over here and 5 units over here and 4 units over there? I get that impulse. I get it. But I can tell you, I've been in city after city after city where they will say, we had to move heaven and earth to get this thing done. And this thing brought 20 units, affordable units on the market. And you're like, well, how much do they cost? And they give you the price. And you're like, that doesn't feel affordable. And they're like, well, for our market, it is. And then you ask them, well, what does your market study say you need in affordable units? You just brought 20 units on. How many do you need? Oh, we need 4,000. Housing feels like a joke because our approach does not work. We have to break out of the mindset that we are going to make affordable housing and start talking about how do we make housing broadly affordable. What is a set of policies? What's the set of approaches? What are the things that we can do to make housing more broadly affordable to people? This is what it means to break out of the housing trap. And I'm not going to pretend this is easy in the sense that it is a modest tweak, but I am going to suggest that we have all the tools that we need to do this here today. It starts with this. These two products are financial products. If we recognize them as financial products primarily and only secondarily as shelter, it does something really powerful for our perspective. These things can be easily financed. They are great financial products. The single family home, we can build those all day in every market around the country. We can just go build more single-family homes. They are great financial products because they can be, that mortgage paper can be sold off onto a secondary market, bundled with a bunch of similar products from around the country, split up into securities, and sold off to pension funds and other investment funds, banks. Other people will buy those in ready amounts. As many mortgages as we could create, we can bundle and do that product. This is a fantastic financial product. This, the 5/1, or derivations of this, is also a fantastic financial product. The 5/1 is 1 story of concrete construction with 5 stories of wood construction on top. Again, this is a commercial real estate product, not a residential real estate, although sometimes they are condominiumized and sold off as individual units. Again, this makes a fantastic financial product. Their building is astounding to me because you see these in every market. My little town of Brainerd, Minnesota, 14,000 people. We're getting our first one now this summer. It's not because there is demand for this style of building. There's demand for housing units, no doubt. But this building is being built in my city, in your city, in every city across the country because there is a huge secondary market for them. Banks take very little risk in financing this. They can sell it off. It will be bought up very quickly. It will be bundled. It will be securitized, hypothecized. It will be sold off, and everybody will make a lot of money. These are great financial products. They also are housing, again, but remember we talked about what the product is. The idea here is not to get people into housing. It is to create financial products. If we recognize this is a bell curve distribution of capital. Very rough. What I want you to recognize is that the majority of our capital, the majority of the money sloshing through the system for housing goes into these 2 products. They are well financed, well built. If you are in a position close to capital, you can get hundreds of millions of dollars for these 2 products. Very, very rich people build homes. They're custom homes, they're their castles. There's no real market for them. When they're sold in like odd, weird ways that all of us don't really understand, right? But very, very wealthy people don't have a problem financing their homes, right? They just don't. They have access to capital. They're able to finance things in ways that you and I don't. But what doesn't exist in this marketplace is this stuff right here. This stuff at the very, very entry-level end. If we want to anchor our market, if we want our market to be more locally responsive, we have to actually create products in our market that are not solely financial products. We have to create products in our market that actually respond to local market dynamics. And the place where that is happening, the place where that can happen, is at the very entry level of the spectrum. This is how we anchor our market. What do these units look like? They don't look like what we are building now, right? I'm going to give you 3 examples. This is a single-family home. There are a lot of people, and I don't mean to overgeneralize, but I think demographically there's a lot of older people who are in more house than what they need. They like their home. They like the memories they have there. They like the neighborhood. Maybe their church is up the street. Maybe they've got friends next door. They don't want to move, and they shouldn't have to move. But they are house rich, and often they find themselves cash poor. In any kind of normal situation, someone who finds themselves house rich and cash poor would alleviate that very quickly. They'd alleviate that very quickly by taking one of their spare bedrooms, putting an exterior door on it, putting in a kitchenette, and renting it out as an apartment. It's a very, very simple thing. And we see this in other cultures around the world. And if we go back prior to our kind of over-regulated suburban experiment, we see this happen in the US all the time. This is a very natural way to add housing units very quickly. If you think about doing this, not only is it very easy from a construction standpoint, but it's actually a really good thing for the people in the house. You have another unit brought out. This allows a family to stay in their home, to finance things that they otherwise wouldn't, to turn some of their excess house into cash that they desperately need. I know as a Minnesotan, that there's a lot of elderly people in my neighborhood who struggle to shovel their sidewalks when it snows, mow their yard in the summer. It's an easy thing to trade rent, or a little bit of rent, for a nice deal like that. Someone to talk to, someone to go to the grocery store with. I don't want to over-idealize this, but the idea of having a human connection as opposed to getting an email from a hedge fund in 4 states away is a very different kind of dynamic, one that will anchor housing prices. Backyard cottages. Don't call these ADUs. It makes you sound like a geek. It's not relatable to people. No one wants an alien in their backyard. But the idea of a cottage is something like very nice. We can do these at scale. We can build these very cheaply. We can drop them in. We don't have to have them last for 120 years. They can even be units that we can think of as temporary, something that would last 20 years, 30 years, and then be like torn down and rebuilt like a cheap garage. But we can build them to be safe. We can build them to be, comfortable. Sometimes people push back and they'll say, well, Chuck, I don't want to live in a backyard cottage. I'm like, okay, I get it. But there's a lot of college students out there. There's a lot of older people out there who are house poor. There's a lot of people who just got a divorce and need a place to go for 6 months. All those people can use a place to stay. Again, another chance to turn your property into cash, into rental income very, very quickly. So this is not at odds or adverse with people in the neighborhood. People in the neighborhood can benefit from this. It's also not a radical shift or change in the neighborhood. If we go back to this one, one of the pushbacks we get a lot is, well, where is everybody going to park? And I'm like, well, we didn't have that problem when it was 3 high school kids, right? We won't have the problem today. How many people in here want to live in a 400, 500 square foot house? That's fair. How many of you have lived in a 400, 500 square foot house? Look at that. When we pull that bottom rung out, what we do is we make it so people can't get a start. When we put that bottom rung back in, what we do is we stabilize our market because we're providing a lower priced product. And so all the rest of the products in the market can't be drawn crazy by the marginal buyer. Starter house. Don't call this a tiny house. This is a starter house. If you go to your historic neighborhoods and walk around in them, you're going to see a lot of starter houses. Now, they won't be 400, 500, 600 square feet because they were starter houses 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Today, they will be a starter house, but it will have addition. You're going to have to look closely to pick out the starter house within it because it's usually just been incorporated into now what is a larger building. Because that's what a starter house is. It's not some like fetish. It's not some, oh, look at that cute little tiny house. This is where people around the world for thousands of years got started. They built something small, something they could afford. When they got a little bit of money, they put an addition on the back. When the kid was born, they put on the second story. The neighbor came over and helped, and they went over and helped the neighbor with theirs. This is a natural building block. It's a building block that we've taken out. We need to put it back in. So to create this market, to anchor our market, to bring these products to market at scale, at the scale we need to actually affect prices here locally, we need to do 3 things. The first thing we need to do is regulatory reform. The second we need to do is to create an ecosystem of incremental developers. And the third we need to do is to localize finance for those entry-level units. And I'm going to go through each of those here within the next hour. No, I'm just kidding. I'll do this really quick. And I want you to note with all 3 of these that this is stuff we can do. We don't need federal legislation. We don't need state assistance. We don't need Wall Street money. We can actually do all of these things here locally today, now. It won't crash housing prices. It won't destroy our housing market, but it will create like the penny loafer of housing in a way that will keep all other housing prices from being non-responsive to our local situation. So, at Strong Towns we have a saying, no neighborhood can be exempt from change, but no neighborhood should experience radical change. We need to change our codes, our regulations, so that every neighborhood can evolve, adapt, thicken up, add more housing units over time. When we do things like this, and this is what our current regulatory environment creates, is these large leaps. The marketing brochure of the post-war suburban experiment is stagnation. You buy into the development, and then we will lock in place through zoning codes, through building codes, through other regulatory friction, we will lock in place exactly what you have today, which is sold to you as, in a sense, like a permanent prosperity. Anyone who understands ecosystems and natural ecosystems recognize that stasis is not a sustainable position. Everything needs to evolve and adapt, or entropy just takes over. And so what we see is that neighborhoods built in the 50s and 60s have suffered the worst. Those in the 70s and 80s are kind of the next, 90s and early 2000s. When we lock neighborhoods in amber, regulatory amber, what we get is we get artificial stagnation. And we get a kind of push to find and identify the neighborhood that we can, in a sense, victimize with the big radical change. This is in Sarasota, Florida, and you can see, you know, the single-family homes along here. These ones are boarded up. The very, very large leap. It's interesting because when you build a 200-unit building like this, they'll say, well, we'll make, you know, we're going to take out 10 homes, sure, or we're going to take out 4 homes, sure, but we'll add 10 affordable units in this big apartment complex, so we're going to be way ahead, right? It actually doesn't work that way, because what happens is when we make a large leap like this, what we signal to the rest of the neighborhood is your neighborhood now is prey to the capital predator. And so people respond to that in logical ways. Instead of fixing up your house, instead of going out and replacing your siding that's worn, instead of fixing your roof, instead of investing as if your kids will inherit the place someday, you recognize that the highest and best use of your property is to be sold to someone who's going to do something like that. And so not only does this area stagnate, but the entire neighborhood starts to stagnate, because the people who are going to buy your home are not buying it as a home, they're buying it for an investment product. Yes, your value goes up, theoretically, but what happens is that the neighborhood becomes the domain of speculators and slumlords, and you see this kind of decline effect set in across the whole neighborhood. Large leaps feel like progress. They're actually the opposite of progress. They reinforce stagnation. We need to make it so that we have small increments happening in every neighborhood all the time. The standard that we have set forth is that someone wanting to do one of these entry-level products, someone wanting to convert their spare bedroom into an accessory apartment, or build a backyard cottage, or build a starter house, they should be able to walk into City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed permit application, walk out by noon with permission to build, and start building at 1 o'clock. That is the level of regulatory friction we need if we want to do this at scale. That is very possible. There's no reason why we can't do this. And yeah, that's the challenge. There's other things, and we can spend a whole hour on just regulatory reform. I'm going to say, if you are serious about housing and you're serious about housing affordability, you can't have parking minimums. I mean, you just can't have parking regulations. It's like the base level of seriousness to dealing with this issue. When I go to places and they're like, hey, we really want to work on this affordable housing thing, it's like one of those it's like I'm trying to think of there's Van Halen, who's like, the red jelly or the red M&Ms or whatever. It was like that was the thing that they looked for to make sure you had read their entire contract. The thing that I look for is like, have you repealed your parking minimums? Do you have crazy suburban parking minimums? If you do, you really haven't delved into this issue very deeply. We need to build a whole team of incremental developers. And by build a team of incremental developers, what I mean is that the city needs to actually foster an environment where incremental developers can come together and be really successful. We've seen cities do this at scale, where they actually bring in outside training, We've seen places where they've started to work with their community colleges to train incremental developers. Understand what being an incremental developer is about. It is about doing like 40 different tasks, very few of which are related to each other, right? You have to be the ultimate like jack of all trades. And what we find is that incremental developers don't thrive in isolation. They actually thrive when they are connected to each other and when they're helping each other figure stuff out. Oh, you went to that bank? Don't go work with them. Here's my guy that I'm working with over here. Oh, you use that carpet layer? Yeah, I use this one over here. They're really, really reliable, really good. It is this kind of information sharing and this type of help and reinforcement that makes this explode. Who is an incremental developer? Well, an incremental developer is not someone who goes to college to be a developer or gets a degree. It's really someone who has a passion for something, right? The house across the street is in decline. I'm going to buy it up and I'm going to convert it into a duplex. That's an incremental developer. You know, the corner lot over there has sat vacant for 20 years. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to build a house there. That's an incremental developer. I'm a teacher. I've got the summers off. I'm going to spend my time in the summer working on a house that I'm going to rehab and put on the market. That's an incremental developer. Incremental developers look like us. They look like everybody. And so when we're talking about creating an ecosystem of them, what we're asking for is for our own human capital to come out of the woodwork. Because there are lots and lots of people in our market who are underemployed, who have a passion for this, who want to do this, but either don't know how to get started or feel like the task is going to be too great. When we get these people together, when we give them a little bit of support and a little bit of training, they can do amazing, amazing things. And we need them to build these anchor units. We need them because the other home builders, the other people in the market are building financial products. They're doing it in a very secure way. They're doing it in a very low risk kind of way. And there's no incentive for them in the market, in the macro market that we've set up, for them to come and do these smaller little projects. We actually need a different style of developer to do that. Finally, and last thing, we need to localize our finance. Remember when I said I went through the whole Great Depression, how we funded things in the Great Depression, or prior to the Great Depression? But I said the federal government came in and said to banks, like, we got your back. With every iteration, with every one of those bubbles, with every one of those kind of upward gyrations, the center of gravity of finance has gone further and further away from local banks. I was talking to a banker last week and I said, you know, local bank doesn't even need deposits anymore. And he goes, yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not too far of a stretch. If you think of the bank in the 1930s, the bank in the 1930s needed your money in the bank in order to lend it out. Local banks today have a completely different financing model, really. And we do need some reserves, local, some depositors, but largely what they're doing is they're leveraging, again, these macroeconomic flows. It's a very, very different situation. We, as a community, if we're very intentional about it, can go in and at really no risk to us, at very low risk to us and no cost to us ultimately, just a different mindset, can finance all of this construction, all of this entry-level anchoring construction. But it will take, again, us kind of recognizing that the housing market that exists today is a macro market with a missing local element. And we actually need to create that local element. Let me give you some examples of this. These are people in Oswego, New York. They started a Historic Renaissance Association. They give out micro grants. By micro grants, I mean $50 grants, $100 grants, sometimes really, really small. Sometimes $1,000, but I think that's the cap. They had neighborhoods that were in decline, that needed investment, that were going in the wrong direction, that were becoming prey to the predator, and they wanted to move them in a different direction. One thing that they recognized is that people didn't have confidence in their own neighborhood. They looked at their neighborhood and they said, we are simply fodder for outside investors to come in. So I'm not going to replace my windows. I'm not going to paint my house. I'm not going to fix my roof. When those things didn't happen, it signaled to everyone else that this is a neighborhood in decline. And so what they did is they created a micro grant program And that program said, we will reimburse you up to 50% of the cost of doing something to your house. But that something has to be visible from the street. We want people in the neighborhood to be able to see what you've done. Signal. The catch is, you could not apply as an individual. You could only apply as a block. And on the block, you had to have 70% of the property owners bought in. And so all of a sudden, someone who wanted to repaint their house and was happy to get $1,000 to help had to go talk to their neighbors about what they wanted to do. And the question they had to talk to them about is there anything that you would like to do to make your house better? And all of a sudden you had neighbors, instead of retrenching inside and kind of just giving up to the decline that had set in, you have neighbors out talking to each other about their vision, their hope for their own neighborhood. All of a sudden, one block would just pop up and just be amazing, right? You live in this neighborhood and it's all in decline, and then all of a sudden, one block of homes, over one summer, 7 people did something nice to their house. Wow, that block looks nice. And then bam, this block over here looks nice. So it wasn't like one property here, one property here, one property here. It was a whole block at a time. And it was astounding. And what it did is it catalyzed all of that capital that had been sidelined by people who loved the neighborhood, loved the place, wanted to see a future in it, but just didn't, to actually start doing the things that other property owners do. They have invested something like a couple $100,000 total over the decade of this project. The city is now supporting them as well. They have seen tens of millions of dollars of private investment as a result. In Muskegon, they have started to use tax increment financing to actually buy down the price of a house. If you go out and you build a starter house in Muskegon on a vacant lot, so these are vacant lots, they've been vacant for decades, they've got sewer and water, roadway, that just no one's found a development that works on them. If you go out and build on that lot, they will take the next 20 years of your tax payments and they will actually apply that to a mortgage, apply that to the loan. So instead of paying $200,000 for the house, you might pay $160,000 for the house. And the city will, in a sense, finance the other 40 through the collection of your taxes. Again, the city doesn't lose any money on this. They can do that at scale. This is lots that have been vacant often for decades, so it's not like we're missing out on any tax revenue. The city can do this at scale. In California, they've actually created programs to finance those backyard cottages. Right now in California, a backyard cottage is almost an impulse buy. You go to a used car lot and you're like, ooh, I would like that car, and then all of a sudden someone comes out with a piece of paper and a pen and says, if you just sign here, you can drive it home right now. You're like, wow, that was kind of pushy, right? If you go to a backyard cottage lot in California, it's the same experience. You want that in your house? Let's look up your house. All right, you can do this, just sign here. In 60 days, we'll have it all set up for you. We'll hook up the sewer, the water, and all that. You just sign here, the financing is all taken care of. You can start charging rent, and the amount you pay is going to be less than what you charge in rent. You want that extra money? We can use financing tools to make this very, very, very easy. In Minnesota, my home state, we actually do special assessments. We think of special assessments as being something we do for roadways and sewers. We go out and we put a new water line in. We charge you for that and put it on your taxes. It's a special assessment. It's a direct assessment. We can do this for housing as well. We can go out and we can go out and work with the property owner. You want that backyard cottage? All right. We can build it. The city can actually finance it, and we'll just collect it on your taxes. Banks hate this because a bank issuing a mortgage will be the first lender. A second mortgage then will be the second lender. The third mortgage will be the third lender. So they're all in a line. The first one gets paid first. The second one gets paid second. When we do a special assessment, we become the 0.5 lender. We go in front of the first mortgage. So the city becomes the first one to get paid in the case of any type of a default. We cannot lose money doing this. In Florida, they actually go back to what was being done in the Great Depression. Remember I talked about these loans with the balloon payment at the end, and the banks being worried about, oh, we can't do that locally. if you make us lower the down payment or do that. And the federal government came in and said, hey, we will provide insurance on that loan, so go ahead and make that riskier loan. Cities, and to some degree philanthropy, and we've seen in Florida the use of philanthropy kind of wide scale, can do that same exact thing. We'll co-sign that loan for you. We'll go to the local bank and we'll say, you normally wouldn't make that loan, but we want this housing product. We kind of believe in it. We think this will work, and we're going to co-sign that loan. Again, it doesn't cost anything to co-sign a loan. If the loan goes bad, the city is, again, in first position to collect. These are not high-risk investments. They're not things that are going to raise everybody's taxes. They're not things that are going to cost a ton of money. But when we focus on those anchor units, those entry-level units, there are things that we can do at scale over and over and over again to create lots and lots of those units in the marketplace. Local governments and philanthropy can finance low-cost, low-quality housing. They can do it at scale, and they can do it at essentially no cost to taxpayers. The thing that I get over and over again from people when we talk about housing is that they feel powerless. There's nothing we can do. This is out of our control. I'm a mayor of a city. I care a lot about housing. I can go out and build some affordable units, but I know it's a dumb exercise that's not going to really make things better. I'm a city council member, and I ran on this issue, and I'm going to campaign to get these 20 units over here built, but our economy needs 4,000 of them here locally, and I know this isn't working. I'm a housing advocate. I'm trying to get people into housing. It's really hard. I feel helpless. We feel helpless because we are in this ship adrift at sea. We stop feeling helpless when we anchor ourselves to something locally. When we create a feedback loop here that responds to our capacity and our ability to pay. This will not crash our local housing market. We're not going to have to contend with people saying you're wrecking my home values, you're doing all that. But what this will do is it will create a lot of entry-level products. It will get a lot of people into a lot of housing. It will stop the craziness of housing prices going up despite people's ability to pay. And it will give us back our agency. Because the worst thing about the housing crisis today is that feeling of powerlessness. That feeling like, I could lose it all at any time. If you are in a house today and you've built up a lot of equity, you're looking at the market and you're going, that really high bubble makes me scared. Because I know that my housing prices could drop by 50% tomorrow and we still wouldn't even be back to like normal conditions. If you are without housing, you're looking at it and you're saying, this is scary. Because I couldn't afford it here, it's way up here. It is that lack of agency that is driving us crazy. And we can take steps to end that powerlessness. If we do that, we can not only create a lot of units very quickly for a lot of people, we can not only make our market more responsive to us, create that dynamism that we all want to see, but we will improve people's lives. And that's ultimately what the Strong Towns approach is all about. The new book is out. This is part of our book tour. I'm really, really grateful that you signed up to have me come here. I'm going to Richmond later today. One of the great thing about book tours, I get to go to a lot of places really quickly. The bad thing about book tours, I don't get to stay in places very long. So everybody here has been kind and generous, and I appreciate all the smiles and nods. You give me a lot of affirmation as I'm doing this. I would love to come back and spend some time with you in the future because I have been told you're doing great things. I have been able to spend a little bit of time here, and your city, like all Eastern cities, it just has beautiful bones, and it looks like a wonderful place. And the fact that all of you showed up today on your lunch hour to talk about housing really means a lot to me. So thank you very much. And if you want, strongtowns.org is our website. Just so you know, we publish 2-3 articles every day. We've got many different podcast streams. We're on every social media channel. We do a lot of video work. We're trying to share this message with everybody that we can. I'm grateful people are recording this today. Please, if you really value the work that we're doing, take our stuff and share it with other people. It's all free to access, free to use. It's Creative Commons licensed. You don't even have to tell people that you got it from us. I always tell people, if you think I wrote something really brilliant, you can just copy and paste it and like send it and just pretend that you wrote it. That's perfectly fine with us. We're trying to get this message out to as many places as we can. We're a nonprofit organization, so if you are interested in supporting us, you can go to strongtowns.org. We do have a very active membership program and local conversation program. So there are local groups meeting all around the country trying to do Strong Town stuff. We've created a support network for them. And if you want to get started with that, you can go to strongtowns.org/local and find out who's around you that wants to work on advancing this conversation. So, Casey, what are we doing?
Zoning reform.
All right.
Zoning reforms 2 weeks ago.
Do you want to talk about that? Talk about it.
So the first biggest thing happening right now is Harrisonburg zoning reform. The last time we've had citywide zoning reform on this was in the 90s. There have been some changes since the 90s, like the internet. The housing market just over the last 4 years has changed dramatically. The median home price in Harrisonburg has gone from $240,000 to $330,000 in 4 years, and since the 90s, it's changed quite a bit more. So the Zoning Reform Committee met for the first time 2 weeks ago. If you want to hear more about what's going on in the city, about this kind of thing, I would encourage you to either also to Harrisonburg specific. I'd encourage you to go to livableharrisonburg.org or sign up the form in the entrance. We're a Strong Towns local conversation for exactly the kind of change that you just saw. Right.
Perfect. So I'm a Minnesotan, and I get uptight about intruding on people's time too much. So I'm grateful that you're here. Two quick things. First, your local bookstore is here, and they have lots of copies of the book. And I have a pen, and I'm going to sign them. You can buy it from Amazon. Why buy it from Amazon when you can buy it from your local bookstore? It's way better. And yeah, and your local bookstore is awesome. Really, the reason why we publish through Wiley Publishing is because they promised us they could get it to every local bookstore in a reasonable way. So I hope they got it to you in a reasonable way. And I'm going to stay up here as long as people want to buy these books, and I will sign every one of them, and we can talk one-on-one. You have a question? I was going to say, let's take like 2 or 3 questions. If you have to leave because like you got a job in a real life, you won't offend me by getting up and walking out. But if you want to do a couple questions, we can do that, and then I'm going to respect their time and do that. So please, go ahead. Yes, you're so enthusiastic.